Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome back. We are going to resume our course that is AngularJS and Web API. Today we will study the concept of controller behaviors. In the last lecture, we studied that there is a model class. Uh, AngularJS works on the principle of MVC model most of the times. Model stands for data, so this is our data. So we have also defined a controller, so you can see that this is the controller, and as far as the view is concerned, this is the view. So today we are going to add some controller behavior is basically the function inside the controller that is basically uh, uh, that is basically used to perform the functionalities, operations on the data of the view of the scope inside the controller class. As you can see that this is our model, so this is the scope service that we have used in our controller. The role of the scope is basically to limit the amount of data or model which we want to present to our view. So for example, if we have a model which contains the name of the customer, also it contains the items. So scope is basically used to define. Scope variable is basically the service, and it is basically used to define the scope of the data, the scope of the model which we want to present to the view. For example, in our case, we have defined MOD. So MOD contains variable MOD contains customer, and it also contains the items. And we can limit the scope as well. For example, we can limit something like this one, items. So now the scope is although the model contains the name of the customer as well, but if we have provided the items mod dot items, so this means that we are limiting the scope of the model to our view. So at this time the view can just point to the items, but it cannot display the name of the customer uh, as uh, as for example, if we execute this one application now. So let's see, I am going to execute this one application, Angular start. There are many nice things in the AngularJS framework, and out of oh, there is no customer, there is no item. Why? The reason is now our scope, our model is the variable name. Variable name of the scope means it is a dynamic property of scope. So now the model contains just the items. It does not contain the name of the customer. So as our table, as you can see that in our table, we have used model dot items. Now there is no dot items. Rather, model now is directly pointing to the items. So if we control F5, now the data is there, but there is no customer. So the point that I would like to explain, that what is the role of the scope. The role of the scope is to present the amount of data to the view on the basis of the scope, on the basis of limiting the model, means whatever is the amount of data that we want to display, because MVC means model view controller. Model is independent of view, or view would not directly use the model data. So the point is, controller is basically responsible for presenting the model data to the view. So uh, the scope is basically a service, and this is basically used to its name is according to its functionality, means it is limiting the scope of the model data for the view. At this time, view is not able to access the customer because mod dot items. The scope variable contains mod dot items. So I'm not presenting the customer to the scope variable model named as model. So that's why that is not available here. I am going to roll back it again. Again, to means mod. I am going to again provide all the data model dot items. So in the start we discussed that we will study the concept of behaviors in this lecture. Behaviors are basically the functions which are used inside the controller class to perform the operations on the data. Behaviors, if you have studied my second course that is named as ASP.NET MVC, so the concept of behavior is similar to the concept of action methods inside the controller class when we study ASP.NET MVC framework. So just as you know that AngularJS just plays its role on the client side. Client side means inside the HTML file. So uh, it is also using the model MVC model. So we are going to define one behavior inside our controller class. For example, the behavior that I want to define, let's I am going to define a behavior named as for example, I want to add one item programmatically. Let's define the HTML outside the boundary of this one. Let's start with div and class is equal input group. Input uh, controls would be the part of this one. Input class is equal to form control and ng. This is basically input text box. Ng model is equal to, for example, item name. Very simple. I'm going to define an input control and I'm going to dispatch. This is the input control. I can place the name of the item 7 8 something whatever. So I want to define a button in this. uh, we can also use one more class. Class is equal to panel. So inside the panel class we can define even our table as well. So so this is what is the next thing that I want to define. I want to define basically button span class input group button btn button. So this is the class for the span and what I want to define a button. All this is related to the Bootstrap. If someone is not familiar with the Bootstrap, then he should study the Bootstrap from the internet. I already have told that there are two sites which are very popular named as W3 Schools and Tutorials Point. So study well the tutorial of Bootstrap. I am assuming that you are familiar with the Bootstrap. So I'm going to define a button basically here. So this is a button. What should be the name of the button? The name of the button is let's suppose add new item. Let's suppose. So yes, add new item. Now if I want something and I want to add this one into this one list, basically there is a need to define some triggering on this one button. So on what we want that if someone clicks on this one button, whatever is the value of this one text box, that should be the part of the item name, right? So they as we are studying AngularJS gradually. So for performing click operations, uh, there is a directive named as ng click. Ng click is basically used to file a click event on this one button. So when this click is when user will press the click button, uh, what should uh, what should be there? There should be a method add new, let's suppose, item, and it should also contain the name of the item. This is from this one item name, whatever is inside this one means ng model means item name, whatever is inside the item name, user will type whatever. It should be the part of the grid. Right now, uh, as you can see, for example, if I write item 5, I'm going to press nothing. Nothing is happening because we have not defined any function. The name of the function that we have defined, we want to define, that is named as add new item. So add new item function, we want to define the behavior. Behaviors are defined on your scope variable. So add new item, this should be a function means, let's suppose this is a function. When someone uh, clicks the button, what should be there? It should be the part of your grid. So the grid is basically, at this time our grid is uh, scope.model. It is, this variable is pointing to mod, and mod is basically customer and items. So what do we want? Scope.model dot I want to access this one array, so this means that this is named as items dot push. There is a method push. uh, this is a function. I want to push the data of a new item. For example, I know very well that this is how to define a new item in for the grid. So I am going to define uh, the function, because I'm going to pass the data of item name here. So I'm going to use this one. Let's suppose item name, or it should be named something like name of item, because the property name is also item name. So I'm going to change a little bit name of item, right? So let's see whether it works properly. I want to define a new item that is named as item 5. Oh yes, item 5 is there. And if I want to press more item, then this array is going to be increased with the, so as long as I am clicking, new items are going to be added. So basically basically we have defined this is called controller behaviors. Controller behavior. Controller behavior is exactly the action method on the controller, inside the controller, and which is basically used to process data of the view. So this data is being passed by the view to this one action method. And on the basis of this one data, what I have done, I have uh, written a single line of code to push the new data whatever, uh, and make it the part of the array. So this is the behavior that we have defined. One more behavior that I would like to show you here. For example, let's refresh it. So it's back again. Let's suppose I want to define, I want to increase uh, a few properties. For example, I have defined item name is in stock. This is true or false. And now stock quantity, QTY, stock quantity. What is the stock quantity? For example, this is 4, and I am going to add stock quantities for others as well. For example, this is colon. It should be colon. Stock quantity for all the values. This. Where should be the changes now? Stock quantity. Let's suppose I'm going to increase the stock quantity. This is 20. This is 14. This is 3. Let's suppose. So there are stock quantities. Now there is a need to define again the stock quantity here as well. Stock quantity, for example, this is 7. And also I'm going to add one more column, stock quantity, stock QTY. I know very well now I have increased one more property inside the items array named as stock quantity, so I can use this one, stock quantity. So TD, and this is model binding expression that I'm going to use it again. Stock quantity. So stock quantity should also be displayed. Yes, the stock quantity is there for 20, 14, and 3. So basically, I'm going to define one more behavior uh, on the basis of my requirement is if the stock quantity is let's suppose less than 10, it should be highlighted. For example, 4 should be highlighted, 3 should be highlighted with the showing the warning. So I have to use some class to show the warning to the user that this is the quantity of stock which is very below the minimum level. So my minimum level value is, let's suppose, 10. So let's see which class will help me. There are many classes that we can use. Let's, for example, uh, I am going to use a class, let's suppose, uh, for this one row, or directly I will use this one class. Class is equal to, let's suppose, the class is uh, let's suppose label dash warning. Let's see whether this class works fine. Yes, it is. This class is working. This label is highlighted. This label is highlighted. I'm just going to highlight this one uh, column. So but at this time basically I have to remove the one thing, that is striped. I don't need striping at this time, for example. So for all 4 are highlighted. Now which should be highlighted? Basically I have not defined any rule. One very important thing in terms of MV's AngularJS, that AngularJS, inside the AngularJS we don't have to deal directly with the view, rather we have to define controller behaviors for the rules that we want to implement. For example, instead of let's suppose instead of writing directly the class for all these, I'm going to define a behavior. Let's suppose behaviors are defined are basically the functions, and these are defined inside the controller class. For example, uh, this is the warning for uh, stock quantity. This is the warning for this function is basically used to warn the user about the stock value. And my rule, what a rule that I want to implement, I just want to implement a rule. For example, what should be the value of uh, if the stock quantity is, let's suppose, if the stock quantity is below, let's suppose 10, then it should be highlighted. And if it is more than 10, there is no need. So let's suppose how to define this one. Uh, let's suppose um, there is a need to use the variable that is scope variable uh, $. For example, I will write the logic here. I just want to show you that we can define the behaviors here as well. For example, this is write logic to define warning level. There are two warning levels. One is label warning, and other is you can say label other than warning. For example, I can on the basis of the items. For example, model dot scope dot model dot items dot, although this is not a good logic, but I am just going to present you. We'll change the logic. If is equal to, let's suppose, for length items dot, let's suppose length is less than 3, less than 5, what should be the label success, else label warning. So I am going to return this one value. If there are less than 5 items right now, 1 2 3 4, then this one, else this one. Warning for this is not for stock quantity, this is warning for stock count. Let's suppose if the items are less than 5, then uh, greater than 5, then success, else warning. So this is the method, this is the function, this is behavior, controller behavior that I will use. So I'm going to use by the class attribute ng dash class, and this is the name of, instead of directly writing this one, although this is not a good logic, once again I'm repeating, but just have an idea. So how to debug whether it's working fine, there is, you can write the debugger here as well, whether it's working fine. So let's see. I have Control F5, F12. I am going to again. Oh yes, this is here. So what is the value? Label dash warning. So warning means the values are rendered. So if I add something more, this is next item, this is next item. So this is changed. So greater than 5, this is changed. So this is going to be applied. Again, this we have defined one more behavior, and we have used this one behavior to give look and feel to the view. One very important thing, there is not coupling of there is not such a code, JavaScript code, which is a part of HTML. Inside the HTML you cannot see the JavaScript code. So this is the beauty of the AngularJS, that the JavaScript code is part of either the controller class most of the times, and or it might be the part of the model classes, but it is not the part of the HTML. So in this lecture we have studied something about the behaviors. For any question you can write me at my email address samon.badar@gmail.com. Wait for the next lecture. Thanks.